So I'd like to start with you've mentioned America, Scott, as a brand in decline. What economic and political signals should leaders be watching most closely for in this environment?
I think the majority of our problems can be reverse engineered to a couple scary stats. The first is for the first time in the history of America, the first time in 275 years, a 30-year-old is not doing as well as his or her parents were at 30. That creates tremendous rage and shame. I mean, for anyone who has kids, you have your world of work, you have your world of friends. Something comes off the track with one of your kids, not, your whole world shrinks to that kid. And when you have a 30-year-old at home or a 25-year-old who just isn't living up to the expectations his parents, he himself, or society has built for him, it brings the whole house down. So I would say that, and young people, and by the way, these aren't the incumbents will claim that they'll use terms like network effects and globalization. Bullshit. We have as a society in the US have decided to make a concerted effort through economic policy to transfer wealth from young to old people. People under the age of 40 are 24% less wealthy. People over the age of 70 are 72% wealthier. The child tax credit, which would have cost $40 billion and would benefited young families, get stripped out of the infrastructure bill. The $120 billion cost of living adjustment and Social Security flies right through Congress. Old people in America have figured out a way to vote themselves more money, and the average age of Congress is 62. Two-thirds of them will be dead in 25 years. Are they really that worried about the deficit or climate change? In sum, the primary metric here is how well young people are doing, and they're not doing well. So things like self-harm indexes, things like obesity indices, the number of people having children. 40 years ago, 60% of 30-year-olds had at least one child in the house. Now it's 27. In sum, we have decided to take our kid's credit card and keep running it so you and me can have ketamine and cocaine and champagne in the club.
So shifting gears, have you heard of an app called Aratai, Scott?
I don't think I have.
Okay. Yeah, it means chatter in Tamil, and Zoho, which is the Indian software company, launched this to compete with WhatsApp a few months ago, and it's recently received 7 million downloads in 7 weeks. You've got a whole swathe of folks in India who are trying to get off WhatsApp because they don't want to use a system that's centered in US to use something that's centered in India. Um, what do you think of that?
As awesome as America is, it's 5% of the population and 25% of the world's GDP. I get to live the life I'm not a humble person. I'm a fucking monster. I'm ridiculously hardworking and talented. But the smartest thing I ever did was being born in America, where I had access to free education, UCLA and Berkeley, came of age during the internet when American middle class households funded research that resulted in a post nuclear communications technology called the internet. My mom had access to family planning, which would have made us destitute. I had access to assisted lunch, and I came of age in an era of the internet and rule of law and inbound capital such that I could raise hundreds of millions of dollars from my crazy startups. So all of those things, and by the way, immigrants built the majority of my companies, and then I joined the faculty of NYU. Everything that has given me an extraordinary life is under attack right now, and all of my companies have been global. And when I walked into Samsung or LVMH, they made fun of Americans, but they liked us. They thought we were the good guys, and that's no longer the case. Would you want to work with America right now? We have taken the biggest consumer economy in the world is about to be India. We have fantastic connective relationships with them through our academic institutions. 20% of the NASDAQ by market capitalization is not run by immigrants, it's run by Indian immigrants. And we have this sclerotic economic warfare policy where they say, fuck it, I'm just going to go hang out with Xi and Putin. So the tariff nonsense that was supposed to inspire all this incredible deal making has done that. Unfortunately, the deal making is taking place without us. The soybean farmers in the United States, China has just basically wrecked that entire sector and economy by saying, you know what, fine, we're not buying from you. They've established new relationships with Brazilian and Argentinian suppliers. Those relationships are not coming back. We're discouraging in my industry international students from applying. I mean, these kids come in and spend three, four, $500,000 on tuition and Chipotle and rent, at some of the most incredible margins, and we've said, "Don't come here." When we import a Mercedes for $100,000, it's a 10% operating margin. That's $10,000 trading at a multiple of 8. They get $80,000 in shareholder value. When we export an NVIDIA GPU hopper at $100,000, it's 55 points of operating margin, or $55,000 times a P of 30. We get $1.65 million in shareholder value. Global trade has been disproportionately advantageous to Americans and American shareholders, and yet we believe this bullshit that somehow we're victims of international trade and start lashing out at Canada. We lash out at Canada, right? I love the question that Warren Buffett posed to a friend of his who's a Holocaust survivor. He said, "How do you know if you have a true friend?" And she said, I think I asked myself one question: would they hide me?" You know what Canada did? Canada hid us. 1979 Iranian hostage crisis. The embassy hid 6 Americans and stayed behind after getting them out safely. And we declare economic warfare on Canada? In sum, Brexit, the invasion of Iraq are nothing in terms of own goals to this ridiculous nationalist, weirdo, fascist ideology that the enemy is within and somehow we're victims, and turning our back on the greatest alliances in history, and that's the alliances between us and other democracies. We are literally snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Biggest own goal in history. All this nonsense around tariffs, and instead of sending troops into Ukraine or having a global peacekeeping force in Gaza, we're sending troops into fucking Portland. Here's an idea. Let's get our heads out of our asses.
Not a huge amount of disagreement here, Scott. So is Trump a one-off? What comes next?
I don't know. I think I'm better than your average bear at predicting economic trends and market trends. I would not have predicted this. I think I think a lot about I think in order to address the problem, you have to diagnose it. And granted, I think a lot about the struggles of young men. So everything I'm a hammer and everything I see is a nail. But if you look at why we elected Trump, I think it all reverse engineers to that stat I talked about, 30-year-olds not doing as well. Specifically, young men aren't doing well because so young men are 4 times more likely to kill themselves. If you go into a morgue and there's 5 people who died by suicide, 4 of them are men. Single women own more homes than single men now. And by the way, we should do nothing to get in the way of the progress of women. I think that's a wonderful thing. But we don't have a homeless or an opiate problem in the US. We have a male opiate and a male homeless problem. 3 out of 4 addicts, 3 out of 4 homeless are men. And to the right's credit, they recognized the problem earlier and said there's a problem with our young men. And they kind of Trump flew into the manosphere, Rogan, rockets, crypto. And there's still, if you look at the groups that pivoted hardest from red to blue from 2020 to 2024, there were 3 demographic groups. Latinos, who don't want to be identified as one group. Mexican Americans in Southern California are much different than Cuban Americans in Florida. People under the age of 30 who are just economically focused and said, "I'm not doing well, so I just want change." And you showing me a bunch of stats saying things aren't that bad isn't helping when I can't afford my rent or can't afford my student loans. And then the most interesting thing is the third group that pivoted hardest from blue to red was 45 to 64-year-old women. And my thesis is that that's their mothers. Because if your son is in the basement playing video games and vaping, you don't care about territorial sovereignty in Ukraine or transgender rights. You just want change and chaos. And there's still a lot of women in the United States who will vote for who they perceive as being in the best interest of their husbands and their sons. So I think if we want to go back to an era that embraces our alliances, has greater fidelity for our institutions, the Constitution, kind of bear hugs again democracy. I think a lot of it comes back to lifting up young people and giving young people a greater sense of patriotism. Some solutions. I think we should have mandatory national service. I think young people need to see how wonderful Americans are. The worst thing about AI is that it's crawling the online world, which sucks. When you meet people in person, you guys are going to take a coffee break. You're going to meet people from different sexual orientations, different regions, different income levels, different political leanings. And you're going to find out almost all of them are lovely, lovely. And unfortunately, online is teaching us to think that our neighbor is the enemy. And so I think mandatory national service, I think 8 million homes in 10 years, manufactured homes, which are 50% less expensive than homes built on site, $25 an hour minimum wage, universal child tax credit, tax credits for third places so kids can meet more, fall in love. I think we need to massively level up young people such that they feel better about America, they feel better about themselves. They want to engage in relationships, they want to have more sex, they want to have kids. I think that the metrics we should be focused on are how well our youth is doing and how we go back to being mammals, not economic agents or nutrition for big tech.
Right. Thank you for that. So, one thing that's come up a lot for me with our clients is what advice do you have for CEOs in particular weighing if and how to speak out on political issues, especially when doing so might alienate a segment of their stakeholders?
Look, as a progressive, I want to say be a leader, stand up. But the reality is, on the majority of boards I'm on, I'm like, don't stay out of it. And because it's sort of I think for profit companies are there to create profits, not to be social engineers or the orthodoxy of a certain political viewpoint. And I think in certain instances, you have no choice and you have to take a stand. And I applaud it when companies do that. And we're getting to a point now where when a company is asked to bend the knee, I would argue the CEO has an obligation to think about stakeholders and not just shareholder value and perhaps, say no, which no one has so far. But on the whole, I can just tell you when I'm on boards, I discourage the CEO from saying anything political. Like at the end of the day, we're here to turn inputs into greater outputs and provide economic security for our employees, our shareholders, and their families. And I find a lot of the political rhetoric, especially over the last 10 years, was mostly virtue signaling, was mostly trying to appeal to a younger employee base that they perceived as being more progressive, but the music didn't match the words in terms of how they were actually supporting their female employees or economic policies or policies they were embracing. So I think it's okay to just come out of the closet and say, this is a for-profit entity. We're here for shareholder value. We're going to be good citizens. We're going to be good to our employees because that's smart for shareholder value. But at the end of the day, we're here to create profits, and then it's up to us to elect really smart people who will tax these companies and figure out what to do with that capital. But I think it's dangerous waters to wade into politics because immediately you're going to alienate 50% of America and not 50%, but maybe 30 or 40% of your employees. So 80%, 90% of the time, it's just a bad idea on a risk-adjusted basis. It's just oftentimes the CEO virtue signaling or imposing his or her viewpoint on the rest of the employee base who feels a need to agree with that person because that person has so much control over their economic livelihood. And some, on a risk-adjusted basis, it's almost always a bad idea.
Yeah, that's good advice. So, final question. When are we going to stop talking about AI?
I think AI will be a little bit like electricity, and that is we're going to talk about it for a while, but then it's just going to be something that's so ubiquitous. I think we're going to talk about it more because I'm now believing that we're probably going to see a pop in the AI bubble and it's going to dominate the headlines. So when are we going to? Let's hope we're talking about it for a while because if we're not talking about it, it probably means something ugly has pushed it out. But I think for the next 2, 3 years, it's going to be the premier business story because the numbers are just there's 1 or 2 business stories that will dominate the headlines in business. Either AI continues to just garner extraordinary shareholder valuation increases, or it's popped, and that'll dominate the headlines for a while. So, I don't know, I would say in 2 to 3 years, maybe if I had to guess when we kinda move on to another business story.
Well, this has been a tremendous hour. I think you've got a very engrossed audience here, Scott, I know you can't see them, but I think everyone here has really enjoyed this. Very informative. Thank you. Great.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to From the Horse's Mouth, Intrepid Conversations with Phil Fersht. remember to follow Phil on LinkedIn and subscribe and like on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favourite platform for no-nonsense takes on the intricate dance between technology, business, and ideological systems. Got something to add to the discussion? Let's have it. Drop us a line at fromthehorsesmouth@hfsresearch.com or connect with Phil on LinkedIn.